Good morning. As I was reading in Romans 8 this morning, I came to a part of the passage where Paul talks about hope. It reminded me of a man in the church that I served initially, the first church I ever pastored, who said he just hated when pastors or Christians talked about hope. He hated the word hope because hope to him was this sort of willy-nilly, maybe it will, maybe it won't, and he just didn't want to hear about that kind of thing. And in some ways he was right. Hope in the English language is a tough word because hope really does have this sort of a coin flip feeling to it. I'm going to flip a coin and I hope that it lands on heads, but there's an equal chance that it may land on tails. Oftentimes our hopes are even less than 50-50. If you buy a lottery ticket and you hope that you win, but you need to know that the odds are absolutely stacked against you. And there's not a lot of assurance in that hope, and that probably is just a vain hope. Well, that's not what Paul is talking about. So in Romans 8, in the 24th verse, beginning there, he says, "Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience." He's talking about hope that isn't just a wish, but hope that is a deep, deep assurance. You may know I love John Gottman, who is a marriage therapist and researcher, and one of the things that he has discovered is that couples that do the hard work of building up their relationship and daily work on building their relationship develop what he calls the positive perspective. We also could simply call it the assurance of hope. And the positive perspective is simply this idea that there is absolutely nothing external to us that's going to drive us apart. Money problems, health problems, problems in the wider world, problems with the children, nothing from the outside can drive us apart. It will always be us against the world, and nothing can pull us apart no matter how hard it tries. Now, most couples that have the positive perspective may not even know they have it. It's kind of the hope that isn't seen, and yet when they need it, it is there for them. That too is the kind of hope that we are being called to develop during these days. Not necessarily a hope that God will miraculously end the coronavirus. That has not been the experience of the church in times of difficulty, but rather that wonderful sense of hope that God is with us and nothing can drive us away from God. The hope that we have is the hope that we find in the 23rd Psalm. "Yea, even if I am walking through the very valley of the shadow of death, I don't need to be afraid, because you are with me, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And I'm also promised I'm coming through the valley." And so this day, let me first ask you, what are some ways that you have experienced the presence of God in your life, maybe in these days, or if you are struggling now to experience the presence of God, and sometimes that happens, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you do not have hope. Jesus himself cried out in great pain and agony from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And so that even can be a sense of hope, crying out to a God who seems absent, and yet knowing that God is there somehow deep, deep down is still a sense of hope. How have you experienced that in the past, or how are you experiencing that now? We know that this will eventually end. Plagues end, they run their courses, they end, and we look back and we see all the ways that God was with us during the plague, even if God didn't exempt us from the plague. And then we also recognize that in Romans 8, just before this passage, Paul talks about all of creation groaning, waiting with almost not patience for the redemption of the world, for God to make all things right. And we know that God is with us in the difficult times, but we also know God has a plan for a new heaven and a new earth, and that new earth will not have coronavirus. That new earth will not have all of the difficulties of this earth. And we experience some of that new earth in the here and the now, when we experience God with us. I've experienced that in lots of ways through many of you, as we have talked on the phone or seen each other on Zoom or exchanged emails or texts. I've experienced that wonderful heavenly kingdom, experienced the kingdom of earth that God is promising to redeem. And so on this day, know that hope isn't wishful thinking. Hope is a deep assurance. And my prayer is that you will have that deep assurance that God is with you and that God is walking with all of us as we walk through this valley. God is with us. Amen.